So hello guys, welcome to our very first lecture on income taxation. So last meeting, I have told you na regarding the table of specifications in taxation. So for general principles of taxation, there will be 8 items na itatanong. For income taxation proper natin, 14 items or a total of 20% nung board exam sa taxation. So matter of importance, 11.43% kasi sa general principles of taxation. So medyo mag-ano tayo din dito. Mag-focus din tayo sa principles of taxation, especially itong items 1 to 10. So basically, yung mga tinatanong naman sa general principles, ano lang, medyo madaling sagutan. So kayang-kaya natin. So we begin our discussion on general principles. Sige. Using ko lang. Yan. So we begin our discussion on general principles of taxation. So what are the inherent powers of the state? So there are 3 inherent powers of the state. Nandiyan na yan sa handout nyo. Number 1 is power of taxation. Second is police power. Third is eminent domain. And before that pala, paano natin masasabi na merong nag-exist na isang state? So under the precepts of international law, there are 4 elements of the state. Una-una, people. Second, territory. Third, government. And fourth, yung sovereignty. So as long as these 4 elements concur, a state is born. So pag sinabing inherent power siya ng state, once na nag-exist ang state, it follows yung inherent powers niya. Kumbaga, inborn power siya ng state. Even without the grant of power, meron siyang power of taxation, police power, and eminent domain. So, unlike yung sa power of Congress or yung sa mga House of Representatives natin, di ba meron silang power to enact laws, power to legislate, power to create laws. Under the Constitution, binigyan sila ng power to create laws. Ngayon, meron silang authority coming from the Constitution, pero itong inherent powers natin, anong basis niya? Wala siyang written basis, but principle siya na kapag nag-exist ang isang state, it follows yung 3 inherent powers: police power, eminent domain, and power of taxation. So what is taxation? It's the manner of apportioning the cost of the government among those who in some measure are privileged to enjoy its benefits and must bear its burden. So, by nature, ang taxation is an inherent power. Inherent power siya ng state. So, ang primary purpose niya is to raise revenue to defray the necessary expenses of the government. All other purpose, secondary purpose na. Ang primary purpose niya is to raise revenue for the expenses of the government. So, without which, the government cannot operate. So, ito yung sinasabi ko kanina. So, inherent by nature, inherent in character ang power of taxation kasi guaranteed siya by the mere existence of the state. So, magkaroon ng state, meron siyang inherent power to tax, power of eminent domain, and police power. So it could be exercised even in the absence of a constitutional grant. So sige, we proceed with scope of legislative power to tax. So under the Constitution, binigay yung power to tax sa Congress natin. Now, alin yung magiging scope or yung magiging basis nung tax law natin? Alin lang yung mga pwedeng items na i-discuss when the Congress is creating a law on taxation? So, i-highlight natin to yung purpose for which the taxes shall be levied. Highlight natin purpose. Yung purpose nung tax. And generally, for public purpose siya, pero inherent limitation yun Sige, yung subject of taxation. Alin ba yung mga pwedeng maging subject ng taxation? So, person, property, or occupation within its jurisdiction. Alin pa yung pwedeng i-determine ni Congress? Yung amount or rate of tax. 'Di ba? Sa train law natin, yung recently passed by the Congress, which took effect on January 1, 2018, yung train law, yung amount of tax rate, 'di ba, binago doon. Pinababa yung tax rates. So, ano yun pa yung pwedeng i-determine yung kind of tax to be collected? Ito, termination of agencies to collect taxes. So, in our jurisdiction, it is the Bureau of Internal Revenue who collects the national taxes. So, the power to grant tax exemptions and condonations. Well, may nakalimutan pala ako. The power to specify or for administrative and judicial remedies. When we say administrative remedies, ito yung nasa level pa lang ni BIR, ni Bureau of Internal Revenue. Judicial remedies, these are, merong law creating yung Court of Tax Appeals. So, sa judicial remedies naman yan. So, yun yung magiging scope ng legislative power to tax. Sige. Next item natin, theory and basis of taxation. So, there are three theories. Tandaan na lang natin to. Pinaka-importante is yung lifeblood theory. Taxes are the lifeblood of the government and so should be collected without unnecessary hindrance. Lifeblood theory siya in the sense that the government cannot operate without taxes. So imagine niyo kung paano mag-ooperate ang government kung yung mga tao sa government hindi siya sa sweldo. Saan kukunin yung budget for the services na binibigay ni government to its constituents? Di ba kung scholar kayo, di ba? Makaka-receive kayo ng financial assistance from the government. Yung scholarship naman na yun, kinuha yun from the taxes na kinolect from the taxpayer. Sige. So, necessity theory, government is necessary. However, it cannot continue without the means of paying for its existence. So, the power to tax is an attribute of sovereignty. It is a power emanating from necessity. So, kailangan may burden on the part of the taxpayer to contribute sa expenses ni government. Sige, ito ang basis ng taxation natin. Basis of taxation is the symbiotic relationship theory. Sa ibang libro, ano to? Reciprocal duties, ganon. So, reciprocal in such a way na meron dalawang party, the government and its constituents or yung mga taxpayers. So, si government magpo-provide ng services to the public and then the taxpayers will pay for the cost nung ibibigay or nung services ni government. So, symbiotic relationship theory is the basis of taxation. And necessity theory is the theory of taxation. So, we proceed with the inherent powers of the state naman tayo. Inherent powers of the state, sige. There are three inherent powers of the state. So, number one, taxation, which is the power of the state to demand from the members of society their proportionate contribution sa maintenance of the government. Primary purpose is to raise revenue for the expense of the government. Second is the power of eminent domain. What is the power of eminent domain? Ito yung kukunin yung private property upon payment of just compensation for some intended public use. So, example nitong power of eminent domain, wag na tayong lumayo. Remember yung nasa malapit sa UMAC, yung BGC Ortigas Bridge? That's an exercise of power of eminent domain. So, di ba may mga private properties affected along Lawton Avenue? Di ba? So, yung iba, sa jail side, pati yung sa kabila. So, in the exercise of power of eminent domain, yung mga private properties doon, kukunin ni government, gagamitin siya for public use. Alin yung public use doon? Yung bridge, yung BGC Ortigas Bridge, para may mas mabilis yung transportation by 20 minutes ata. So, hindi ka na dadaan ng EDSA, mag-BGC Ortigas Bridge ka na, and you save time. sa pag-travel. So, power of eminent domain. Now, ito. Under the Constitution, private property shall not be taken without just compensation and for some public purpose. Now, sinasabi natin na inherent power itong eminent domain. So can the state exercise this power without the Constitution, yung Article 3 Section 9 that private property shall not be taken without payment of just compensation. So can the state, pwede bang kunin ng state yung property ng isang tao, yung private property ng isang tao without payment of just compensation? The answer is no. Pero under the Constitution kasi natin, under Section 9, Article 3, sa Bill of Rights to si state, pinoprotektahan niya yung private property ni taxpayer or ni tao, yung private property ng tao para ano? Para hindi siya maging subject to abuse yung pag-acquire ng private property. Remember, inherent power ng state ang eminent domain. Una-una, pwede siyang kumuha ng kahit anong private property. Pero si Constitution, nilimit niya yung power ni state by imposing a limitation on by imposing on payment of just compensation, and dapat yung taking of private property is for some public purpose. Sige. Sa police power naman tayo, is power of the state to regulate liberty and property for the promotion of general welfare. So, ito yung power ni Congress to create laws para ma-regulate yung liberty and property. For example nito yung mga curfew natin. If the Congress or yung sabihin na natin sa ordinance level lang sa local government, nag-impose ng curfew from 10 p.m. to 5 p.m., that's limitation or regulation on the liberty of its constituents. So alin pa? Any law na magpo-provide ng benefits sa tao for the promotion of health, morals, and safety sa general welfare ng constituents. Sige. 12 minutes pa lang naman. So, we proceed with characteristics of the power to tax. So, it is said that it is comprehensive, unlimited, plenary, and supreme. So, yung mnemonic natin, one technique ng pag-study, kasi hindi naman natin kaya tandaan lahat, gumamit tayo ng mga ganitong mnemonic. So, sabihin natin characteristic starts with letter C. Start na rin natin ng letter C. So, COPS. COPS meaning comprehensive, unlimited, plenary, and supreme. Comprehensive siya in the sense that it covers person, businesses, activities, rights, and privileges. So, one of the characteristics of power to tax is also unlimited. In force and searching in extent that courts scarcely venture to declare that it's subject to any restrictions. So, in this case, TO versus Videogram Regulatory Board. So, it is plenary, it is complete, unqualified, and absolute. So, under the tax code, the BIR may avail of certain remedies to ensure collection of taxes. Halimbawa, si BIR nagko-collect ng tax delinquency ng isang taxpayer. Halimbawa, si taxpayer nag-evade or in-understate niya yung sales niya in order to avoid higher taxes, di ba? Eh naman yung purpose nun Either i-understate mo yung sales or yung expenses mo lalakihan para maliit yung babayaran na tax. Now, halimbawa, nag-collect si BIR ng tax delinquency ng isang taxpayer. Now, si taxpayer, wala siyang cash but the taxpayer has properties, whether real or personal properties. So, si BIR, meron siyang remedies to ensure collection of taxes like levy and distraint. Pero i-discuss pa yan sa remedies pa yan Parang sa tax 3 pa ata. So, the BR may avail of certain remedies to ensure collection of taxes. Levy, when it comes to real property, and distraint sa personal property. So yun. Plenary, it is complete, unqualified, and absolute. So the fourth characteristic, supreme. So insofar as the selection of the subject of taxation is concerned, supreme siya kasi broad yung magiging subject ng taxation natin. So cut ko muna yung video. So we resume our discussion on general principles sa ano tayo, inherent limitations. So once a state is born, meron siyang inherent powers. Inherent power to tax, police power, and power of eminent domain. So yung power to tax, meron din siyang inherent limitation. So imagine niyo yung state, meron siyang tatlong buntot na power of taxation, eminent domain, and police power. Yung power of taxation, meron siyang 5 pang buntot. Ito yung mga inherent limitations niya. So inherent limitations, ang acronym or mnemonic ko dito is SPINE. So S stands for situs, P public purpose, I international committee, and N non-delegation, E exempt. So let's start with letter S na. So it means situs. Situs is the place of taxation. So baka hinahanap nyo sa handout nyo yung word na situs. Ito po siya, yung letter C. Territorial in application. So, in the sense that the object and subject of the tax must be within the territorial jurisdiction of a state. So, for example, yung non-resident alien, nag-earn siya ng income dito sa Philippines. So, yung kinita niya for a taxable year shall be subject to Philippine taxation. So, ganun lang siya, territorial in application. So, yung kinita naman ni non-resident alien dun sa ibang bansa are not subject to tax here in the Philippines. So, territorial in application or situs of taxation. So, second inherent limitation that it must be for a public purpose. So, a revenue measure must be laid for a public purpose determined by the legislature. Remember yung scope ng legislative power natin, nakalagay doon yung purpose ng tax, kung bakit siya ini-impose. So it must be for a public purpose. Nagre-record ba? Yan, nagre-record naman. Yung proceeds ng tax must be used for the support of the state or directly promote the general welfare of the community. It must be for a public purpose. Letter I stands for International Committee. So, what does committee means? Committee means courtesy. So, meron courtesy between the states. It only means na yung Philippines cannot tax the other state. For example, yung USA, can the Philippines tax the United States of America? Hindi pwede. In the same way na si USA naman, hindi niya pwedeng i-tax yung Philippines because they are co-equal sovereign. So the one cannot exercise its inherent sovereign powers over another, including the power to tax. Sige, letter N stands for ano siya? Non-delegation. So non-delegation ito because the power to tax is inherently legislative. Kung, di ba, there are 3 branches of the government. So in your study of constitutional law, 3 branches of the government, legislative or yung Congress natin, second, executive, yung sa president, and third is yung judiciary, yung Chief Justice ng Supreme Court. So inherently legislative siya, hence it cannot be delegated by the legislature. However, there are exceptions. There are 3 exceptions. Una, yung delegation to local government. Under the Constitution, si local government unit, binibigyan siya ng power ni Constitution na mag-impose or mag-levy ng taxes, fees, and charges to source out its or to create its own sources of revenue, and it shall accrue exclusively to the LGU. Halimbawa, si national government, si Philippines, diba? Dinelegate niya kay local government, for example, kay local government ni Makati. si local government of Makati, meron siyang power to levy taxes, fees, and charges among its constituents in Makati. So, ang primary purpose niya is to create its own sources of revenue, and that revenue shall accrue exclusively to the local government unit. So, ito naman. Next, exception is delegation to the president. Under the constitution, meron naman si president na power to implemented by Tariff and Customs Code. Ngayon ano na 'to CMTA na siya Customs Modernization, CMTA Customs Modernization Tariff Act. So it allows the president to fix tariff rates, import and export quotas, tonnage and wharfage dues and other duties or imposts. Ito yung mga term na to, technical term to pero ginagamit siya sa Bureau of Customs. So si President meron siyang power to fix the tariff rates. So saan niya kinuha yung power to fix tariff rates? Ginrant na siya ni Congress through a law. So yung dati yung Tariff and Customs Code, ngayon ano to? CMTA na siya. Customs Modernization Tariff Act. On the other hand, si President meron din siyang power to exercise emergency powers and to enter into executive agreements. Third, delegation to administrative agencies. So yung mga admin agencies naman natin, may issue rules and regulations to implement yung tax law natin. So under administrative agency, example nito si Department of Finance and si BIR. Si BIR meron siyang power to create yung mga revenue regulation. So halimbawa, kung paano magfa-file ng BIR form 1700 ganon, kung paano mag method of collection. Yung method of collection and kung pwede bang online magbayad, pwede bang sa bangko magbayad. Dine-delegate na yung power na yun sa admin agencies such as BIR, Bureau of Customs. Ganun. So for the last inherent limitation is exemption of government entities, agencies, and instrumentality. So ang justification dito, the government cannot tax itself because the effect of taking money from one pocket to put it in another pocket. So parang te-transfer mo lang yung pera mo from right pocket to your left pocket. So exempt ang government entities. However, there are exceptions such as government agencies performing proprietary functions for profit. Ito, mga government functions na proprietary. Second, when the charter creating the agency or instrumentality provides that they are subject to tax. And finally, if the government wishes to tax itself. Okay, so let us continue our discussion on constitutional limitations on the inherent power of taxation. So, the constitutional limitations, ang basis natin dito is yung 1987 Constitution ng Philippines. So, for number 1, Article 3, Section 1 of the Constitution provides that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall any person be denied the equal protection of laws. So for letter A, due process requirement, when it comes to taxation, it has two aspects. So number 1, procedural due process and substantive due process. So in general, yung concept ng procedural due process and substantive due process, for substantive due process, there must be a law. And then sa procedural naman, there should be rules promulgated on how to implement or how to exercise that right. So, example natin dito, if kayo as a creditor, nagpautang kayo sa debtor nyo, ang basis nung obligation ni debtor ay under the civil law. So, substantive due process, civil law yung basis natin. Pero, kung gusto mo nang kolektahin yung utang mo and ayaw magbayad ni debtor, we will use yung procedural due process in court. So, paano kumolekta ng utang? Magpa-file ka ng petition, kung saang court siya ipa-file, covered na siya ng procedural due process. Sige, on the other hand, equal protection of laws. So, yung requirement ng equal protection requires that the law must apply equally to all persons within the same class. Same type of persons, same taxation dapat. And which leads us to uniformity and progressivity of taxation. So under Article 6, Section 28 of the Constitution, the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable. The Congress shall evolve a progressive system of taxation. When we say uniformity, it means that all taxable articles or kinds of property of the same classes shall be taxed at the same rate. Yan, pakitandaan na lang tong part na to. So, it is uniform when it operates with the same force and effect in every place where the subject of it is found. That's the case of Commissioner versus Lingayen Gulf Electric Company. Next, constitutional limitation. No imprisonment for payment of poll tax with emphasis on the word poll tax. So what does poll tax means? Ito yung tinatawag natin na sedula. So, yung binanggit na punitin ang sedula, napunit ako. O sedula eh. So, punitin ang sedula. So, under Section 20 of Article 3, no person shall be imprisoned for debt or non-payment of a poll tax. So, non-imprisonment, pag hindi nakabayad ng utang, walang kulong po yan. Pero hindi po ibig sabihin na kapag nanloko, hindi rin makukulong. Nanloko, hindi nagbayad ng utang, pwedeng makulong pa din. So, no imprisonment for non-payment of a poll tax. Poll tax or personal tax ang tawag natin dyan. So next, constitutional limitation, exemption from property tax of religious, charitable, and educational institution. Now ganito, ito ang sinasabi ni Article 6, Section 28. Yung charitable institution, churches, parsonages, convents, mosques, non-profit cemeteries, all lands, buildings, and improvements actually, directly, and exclusively used or yung tinatawag natin na ADE, used for religious, charitable, or educational purposes shall be exempt from taxation. Now, check natin tong part na to. Shall be exempt from taxation. So, does it mean exempted din ba sila sa income and real property taxation? Hindi. Sa pag-interpret ng Constitution, yung foolproof na yardstick in determining the intent of the framers of the Constitution, sabi ni Chief Justice Hilario Davide, part siya ng 1986 Constitutional Commission. So, ang exempted doon sa Article 6, Section 28 are actually real exemption from real property tax. Kasi ang exempted doon yung lands, buildings, and improvements. So, hindi kasama po sa exemption yung income tax. So, exempted sa real property tax, yung land, building, and improvements if it is ADE, actually directly and exclusively used for religious or educational purposes. So, case in point is the case of Lang Center of the Philippines versus Quezon City. So, tingnan natin yung case. So, Lang Center of the Philippines versus Quezon City. So, Quezon City being the taxing authority in QC. So, si assessor from the Quezon City is trying to collect taxes on the real property tax on the properties of Lang Center of the Philippines. So, kinontest nilang center yung assessment contending that yung property niya dun sa QC is exempt from real property tax considering that it is a charitable institution. So what happened in this case? Yung part ng property nilang Center of the Philippines, meron doon na sa loob ng property niya, merong mga pinapaupahan sa private parties. merong canteen sa loob, merong small store spaces, and medical professional practitioners who use the same as their private clinics. So, hindi lahat ng part ng property ni Lung Center is actually directly and exclusively used for charitable purposes. So, ang sabi ni Supreme Court dito sa case na to, hindi exempted si Lung Center of the Philippines sa real property tax. Unang-una, ang justification ng Supreme Court dito, yung property niya is not actually directly and exclusively used for charitable purpose. Meron kasi sa loob ng Lung Center of the Philippines na elliptical orchids and garden center. So these are private entities. So these are for profit making industry sa loob ng Lung Center. So pag sinabi kasi nating exclusively used for charitable purposes, it means in a manner to exclude or as enjoying a privilege exclusively. So it is not exclusively used for the exempted purposes but is subject to taxation. So the word dominant or principal use cannot be substituted for the words used exclusively without doing violence to the Constitution and the law. So since yung property niya not actually directly and exclusively used for charitable purposes, subject to real property taxation na po yung property nilang center. And thus, pinagbayad po silang center dito sa case na to. Okay? So, ito naman. So, grant of exemption requires the majority vote of Congress. I want to put emphasis on the word with the majority of all the members of Congress. Normally, pag magpapasa ng batas ang Congress, ang requirement lang, majority of the quorum, yung present dun sa session ng Congress. Pero when it comes to granting of exemption, ang requirement po ay majority of all members of the Congress. Ang basis natin or yung rationale natin dito in order to prevent the indiscriminate grant of tax exemptions. So let's continue on constitutional limitations, exemption of non-stock, non-profit educational institutions. Article 14, Section 4, Paragraph 3 of the Constitution provides that all revenues and assets of non-stock, non-profit educational institutions use ADE for educational purposes shall be exempt from taxes and duties. So it would be best to compare this provision to Article 6, Section 28. So ang case in point natin here is the case of Commissioner of Internal Revenue versus De La Salle University. So what happened in this case? So si BIR is trying to collect taxes on income tax, value-added tax, and documentary stamp tax on the earnings of the De La Salle University, DLSU for brevity. So ang argument ni De La Salle anchors on Article 14, Section 4, yung kaninang nabanggit na natin. So, ang defense niya, hindi dapat siya magbayad ng tax on this basis. All revenues and assets of non-stock, non-profit, as long as it is for ADE, dapat daw exempt from tax and duties. So, i-check natin. Ang nangyari dito sa case na to, the Supreme Court uphold the argument of DLSU. So compare natin yung Article 6, Section 28 and yung Article 14 and Section 4. So sabi sa Article 6, Section 28, ang exempted doon are only the assets and not the institution itself. So pag sinabi nating assets, yung land, building, and improvements, ADE used for religious, charitable, or educational purposes, exempt yon from real property tax. On the other hand, Article 14, Section 4 provides that all revenues and assets. So ito, nag-emphasize yung Supreme Court na lahat ng revenue and yung assets ni De La Salle or ng non-stock non-profit educational institution, as long as it is ADE for educational purposes, shall be exempt from taxes and duties. So ito. So revenue consists of the amounts earned by a person or entity from the conduct of business operations. So lahat ng revenues ni De La Salle University not subject to income taxation, pero kailangan niya i-prove na yung revenue na yon is used actually, directly, and exclusively used for educational purpose. So yon. For next, yung iba dito kaya naman eh. Kayang basahin na lang. Sige, dito tayo sa non-impairment of contracts. Yung ibang provision kasi dito on the constitutional limitations, self-explanatory na din. Sige. So, dito tayo sa non-impairment of contracts. According to Article 3, Section 10 of the Constitution, no law impairing the obligation of contracts shall be passed. So, example dito, yung revocability of tax exemption. So, a law which changes the terms of the contract by making new conditions or changing those in the contract dispenses with those expressed impairs the obligation. However, the non-impairment rule does not apply to public utility franchises. So, in the same way, it does not apply to when the government grants a tax exemption via when it entered into a contract with a taxpayer, yung exemption ni taxpayer will not be impaired kasi yung sa obligations so for the last constitutional limitation, Article 3, Section 10, which provides that no law impairing the obligation of contracts shall be passed. So, obligations in contracts may not be impaired by the state where tax exemptions are bilaterally agreed upon by the state and the taxpayer. So, tax exemptions bilaterally agreed upon between the government and the taxpayer cannot be unilaterally withdrawn. So, yun lang. So, for stages of taxation, pwede rin siyang tawagin na aspects of taxation. Aspects, number one is the impact of taxation, and number two, incidence of taxation. So, stages of taxation tayo. So, levy is the determination by Congress of the subject and object of taxation. It refers to enactment of law or magpapasa po ng batas si Congress. So, levy is the impact of taxation. So, it is legislative by nature. The act of levy is legislative by nature. So, assessment and collection and payment, ito na yung tinatawag na incidence of taxation. This is administrative by nature. If levy is legislative or ginagawa siya ni Congress, assessment and collection naman si executive branch ng government through the Bureau of Internal Revenue. So assessment, notice to the effect that amount therein stated is due as tax and a demand for payment thereof. Payment is the act of compliance by the taxpayer. So phases of taxation, just the same with stages of taxation. So let's proceed with the doctrines on taxation. Prospectivity of tax law. General rule, tax laws are prospective in application. So yung train law which took effect on January 1, 2018 shall not be applied on income earned before January 1, 2018. So, prospective siya in application. So, what does train law do? Yung sa train law natin, in-amend yung Section 24 of the Tax Code which provides for lower lower tax base, and lower tax rates. So in that case, 250,000 na income, exempt na siya from taxation. So sa train law, binabaan yung income tax to provide higher disposable income sa earnings ni employee. So other doctrines, imprescriptibility of taxes. Taxes are generally imprescriptible. So otherwise, except when the law provides otherwise. So statutes of limitations provided under the tax code. So saan na tayo? Double taxation na. Ito favorite question to sa CPA board exam. Double taxation. So it means taxing the same person for the same tax period and the same activity twice by the same taxing jurisdiction. So case in point is the case of Nursery Care Corporation. Nakayan ko lang Nursery Care Corporation versus the City Treasurer of Manila and City of Manila. So what happened in this case? So ang issue kasi dito is double taxation. So City of Manila inassess and collected taxes from individual petitioners. Sino yung mga petitioners natin dito? Si Nursery Care, si SM kasama din dito sa case na to. So City of Manila nag-assess and collect ng tax based on Section 15. So kapag wholesaler ka daw, distributor or dealer, or retailer ka, under the Revenue Code ng Manila, magbabayad ka ng local tax. That's the first local tax imposition. So yung pangalawang tax naman na nire-refer dito is yung Section 21. Sabi dito, kapag yung articles mo are subject to excise, VAT, and percentage tax, magbabayad ka ulit ng local tax. So magkano naman yon? A tax of 1/2 of 1%, 50% of 1%. So is there double taxation here? Ang sabi ng Supreme Court through Justice Bersamin, yes, merong double taxation. Actually, itong case na to, ito yung question number 1 sa bar exam namin. Ito rin yung part na diniscuss ko sa mga colleagues ko na barista din. So what happened here? Is there double taxation? Sabi ni Supreme Court nga, yes, merong double taxation. So what does double taxation means? It means that taxing the same property twice when it should be taxed only once. Two taxes must be imposed on the same subject matter for the same purpose by the same taxing authority within the same jurisdiction during the same taxing period, and the taxes must be of the same kind or character. So in this case, there are two taxes being imposed. So on the subject matter, privilege of doing business in the City of Manila, it serves the same purpose because to make persons conducting business within the City of Manila contribute to city revenues. Same taxing authority. Ano ba yung taxing authority natin dito? Same taxing authority, City of Manila, within the same taxing jurisdiction, within the territorial jurisdiction of the City of Manila, for the same taxing period based on the calendar year. 6, of the same kind or character. Parehas siyang local business tax imposed on the gross sales or receipts of the business. So here, there is direct duplicate or direct double taxation, double obnoxious taxation. So dito sa case na to, in-strike down yung second taxation natin o yung Section 21 of Tax Ordinance for violating the Equal Protection Clause, double obnoxious taxation. So, sir, paano naman yung indirect double taxation? So, ang direct double taxation, mag-concur lang yung 6 na requisites na to, same subject matter, same purpose, same taxing authority, same taxing jurisdiction, same taxing period, and same kind or character, direct double taxation yan. So in the absence of one one requisite. Halimbawa, may isang mawala dito. Halimbawa, mawala tong same taxing jurisdiction na to. Yung isang nag-impose ng tax ay City of Manila and yung isang taxing jurisdiction naman ay Makati. So, pag ganon, indirect double taxation yon and not violative of the constitutional provision on equal protection clause. So, in this case, Nursery Care Corporation versus City of Manila, there is double taxation.